There are moments in life that split your world into before and after. Moments so raw, so impossible, that even as you live through them, you can barely believe they're real. This is one of those stories. A story about a split-second decision in the heart of a jungle that would reveal something about courage, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child that most people will never witness in their lifetime. It started with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating silence that falls over a forest when something is terribly wrong. He was walking alone through dense vegetation, miles from the nearest village, when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Low, guttural, the kind of sound that makes your blood run cold because you know instinctively that something is dying. Most people would have turned back, would have convinced themselves they imagined it. But something pulled him forward, deeper into the shadows where sunlight barely penetrated the canopy above. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every survival instinct screamed at him to stop, to go back, to get help. But his feet kept moving. And then he saw her. She was lying in a small clearing, partially hidden by ferns and fallen branches. A Bengal tiger. Massive. Beautiful in a way that took his breath away even as terror flooded his veins. Her orange and black stripes seemed to ripple with each labored breath. But it wasn't her size or her beauty that froze him in place. It was her eyes. Those golden eyes that should have been fierce, predatory, dangerous. Instead, they held something he never expected to see in a wild animal. Confusion, absolutely. But beneath all of that, there was something that looked disturbingly like a plea. She tried to stand when she saw him. Her front legs trembled violently as she pushed against the ground, muscles straining under matted fur. For one heartbreaking second, it looked like she might make it. Then her strength gave out completely and she collapsed. Right there. Less than 15 feet from where he stood. Close enough that he could see every ragged breath, every spasm of agony that rippled through her body. That's what every fiber of his being told him to do. Get away from the apex predator. Get to safety. Call for help from a distance. It's what anyone with half a brain would do. But his legs wouldn't move. Because in that gaze, there was recognition. There was awareness. There was a question being asked that had no words, but somehow he understood perfectly. Will you help me, or will you leave me here to die? His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. The signal was weak but there. He called the local wildlife authority, explained what he'd found, and waited for them to tell him what to do. The response came fast and firm. Get away from that animal immediately. An injured tiger is unpredictable. Highly dangerous. Do not approach under any circumstances. Stay at a safe distance until our team arrives. He ended the call and looked back at her. She hadn't stopped watching him. Hadn't growled. Hadn't bared her teeth. Just kept those eyes locked on his, as if trying to communicate something beyond the limitations of species and language. And in that moment, he understood that he had a choice to make. He could wait, stay back, follow protocol, do the smart, sensible, safe thing that any reasonable person would do, and watch this magnificent creature slowly fade away because the rescue team was at least an hour out, and she didn't have an hour. Or he could do something that would either be called insane or heroic, depending on who was telling the story later. He took a step forward. Just one. Cautious. Like testing ice that might crack under his weight at any second. The tiger's ears swiveled toward him. Her body tensed slightly. But she didn't lunge. Didn't roar. She just watched, waiting, as if she too was making a decision about this strange human who was moving closer when any other creature would be running away. Another step. Then another. His pulse thundered so loud in his ears that he wondered if she could hear it. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to run if this went wrong. Because this was crossing a line drawn by millions of years of evolution, a line between predator and prey that wasn't meant to be crossed. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what happens next is going to challenge everything you think you know about wild animals and trust. Hit that subscribe button, and let's continue this journey together. When he was close enough to reach out and touch her, he stopped. She was looking directly into his eyes now. Neither of them blinked. It was like both of them understood that this moment would determine everything that came after. One wrong move, one signal of threat, and it would all end in tragedy. He slowly lowered his gaze, scanning her body for some sign of what was wrong. And then he saw it. Her right hind leg was grotesquely swollen, the flesh around a deep wound darkened with infection. The smell hit him like a wall. Necrotic tissue. Sepsis setting in. This wasn't just an injury. This was a death sentence playing out in slow motion. But what happened next would stay burned into his memory for the rest of his life. The tiger, with an effort that seemed to cost her everything she had left, lifted that injured leg. Extended it toward him. Not in aggression. Not in defense. She held it there, trembling, vulnerable, in a gesture that could only be one thing. A request for help. Tears he didn't even know he was holding back started streaming down his face. Because in all his years of occasionally volunteering with conservation organizations, in all the documentaries he'd watched and books he'd read, he had never heard of anything like this. A wild tiger, one of nature's most formidable predators, lowering every defense and placing her trust in a human in a way that defied every survival instinct. His hands were still shaking as he knelt in the damp earth. He spoke softly, even though he knew she couldn't understand the words. But maybe tone mattered. Maybe the gentle cadence of his voice conveyed something language never could. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm going to help you. You're not alone." From his backpack, he pulled out what little he had. A water bottle. A clean cloth. Some basic antiseptic he carried for minor cuts. It wasn't enough. Nowhere near enough. This wound needed surgery, powerful antibiotics, specialized veterinary care. But he could do something. He could clean the area around the wound, ease even a fraction of her pain, show her that her trust wasn't misplaced. He dampened the cloth and, with movements so gentle it was like handling glass, began to clean around the infected area. She tensed. A low growl vibrated in her throat, born of pain not threat. But she didn't pull her leg back. She kept it extended, allowing this stranger to touch the most painful, vulnerable part of her body. Minutes that felt like hours passed in that tense, extraordinary silence. He worked with infinite care, aware that every second she tolerated his presence was a gift, a demonstration of trust that could shatter in an instant. And she watched him, not with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey, but with something that looked dangerously close to gratitude. When he finally heard the sound of vehicles approaching, he felt relief and sadness in equal measure. Relief because professional help was arriving. Sadness because this impossible moment of connection was about to end. The wildlife rescue team arrived with tranquilizers, specialized stretchers, and a full medical arsenal. They looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Do you have any idea how lucky you are?" one of them said, voice tight with disbelief. "She could have killed you without even trying." He just nodded, unable to take his eyes off the tiger. Because he had no words to explain what had transpired here, this silent understanding he'd shared with a dying animal. As the team prepared the tranquilizer, one of the experienced trackers moved deeper into the vegetation, following markings barely visible on the ground. Suddenly he stopped. "Over here," he shouted, urgency cutting through his voice. "Everyone, you need to see this." The group moved quickly to where he stood. And there, hidden beneath dense brush and fallen leaves, was a tiger cub. Couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. Eyes still adjusting to the world. So small it could fit in 2 cupped hands. And completely alone, trembling, making tiny mewing sounds of hunger and fear. Everything clicked into devastating focus in that instant. This wasn't just an injured tiger desperate to survive. This was a mother. And she had been fighting against infection, against unbearable pain, against impossible odds. Not for herself, but for this tiny, helpless being hidden in the undergrowth. The man looked back at the tiger with completely new eyes. Every growl of pain she'd endured while he cleaned her wound. Every second she trusted him instead of attacking. It hadn't been weakness. It had been the purest form of strength that exists. A mother who would do anything, trust even her natural enemy, if it meant saving her baby. The veterinary team moved quickly. They sedated the tigress carefully, ensuring the dose was strong enough to allow them to work but not so strong it would compromise her already fragile health. As they loaded her onto the specialized stretcher, the cub was placed in a thermal box to maintain its body temperature. Throughout the entire loading process, even sedated, the tigress made low sounds whenever they moved the cub away from her. Her body, unable to move, still tried to respond to the most primal call of all: protect the young. The man asked if he could accompany them to the rehabilitation center. The rescue team hesitated, but something in his determination convinced them. This man had risked his life in a way few would have the courage to do. He deserved to see the end of the story he'd helped write. At the veterinary facility, the full truth emerged. The tigress's wound had been caused by an illegal poacher's trap, the kind designed to capture large prey and hold them until the hunters returned. She had fought to free herself, tearing her own flesh in the process, and had managed to escape. But infection had set in fast, spreading through her system and weakening her day by day. What the veterinarians couldn't understand was how she'd managed to survive this long with that infection. How she'd hunted, even minimally, to feed herself and produce milk for her cub. How she'd found the strength to hide her baby in a safe spot every time she went out for food or water. It's pure will, the head veterinarian explained while reviewing her blood work. Her body should have shut down days ago. But something kept her alive. Something stronger than biology. Everyone in that room knew what that something was. It was that tiny cub now sleeping in an incubator, oblivious to the monumental sacrifice his mother had made for him. The surgery to clean the wound and remove the dead tissue took 3 hours. 3 hours where the entire team worked in focused silence, knowing they were fighting not just to save an animal, but to preserve a story of maternal love that had defied every odd. When they finally finished, the prognosis was cautiously optimistic. If the infection responded to antibiotics, if there were no complications in the coming days, the tigress could make a full recovery. But she was still in danger. The next 72 hours would be critical. The man stayed, slept in an uncomfortable chair in the observation room, waking every time he heard a sound from the tigress. The center staff brought him coffee and food, but he barely touched any of it. All his attention was focused on that room where a mother fought for her life. On the second day, something extraordinary happened. The tigress opened her eyes. Still weak, still connected to multiple IVs and monitors, she slowly turned her head, searching for something. The veterinarians immediately understood what she wanted. They brought the cub, holding it carefully, and moved it close enough for her to smell it, see it. The change was instantaneous. The tension in the tigress's body melted away. Her eyes, which had been glassy and distant, regained that spark of awareness. She made a low sound, a guttural purr that vibrated through the entire room. And the cub, responding to an instinct older than time, pressed against the bars separating the incubator from his mother's recovery cage, seeking that familiar warmth. "I've never seen anything like this," one of the younger vets murmured, discreetly wiping his eyes. "It's like she literally came back to life just from seeing him." And maybe that was exactly what was happening. Because when you have a reason to live as powerful as a child who depends on you, the body finds ways to heal that science doesn't fully understand yet. Day 3 marked the turning point. Her fever broke. Blood tests showed the infection was retreating. The tigress began eating small amounts, a crucial sign that her body was truly starting to heal. And then, on day 4, they did something that standard protocol would never recommend. They allowed the cub to be with his mother, closely supervised by the veterinary team. The moment that tiny being curled against his mother's belly, beginning to nurse for the first time in days, was something no one in that room would ever forget. The tigress, despite the pain she still felt, despite the bandages and tubes and all the trauma her body had endured, wrapped her enormous front paw around her cub, drew him closer, licked him tenderly, purred with an intensity that made her whole body vibrate. This wasn't just a tiger recovering. This was a mother reunited with her child after a separation that must have felt like an eternity. The man watched from behind the observation glass. Tears flowed freely down his face now, with no shame or attempt to hide them. Because this was more than he'd hoped for when he took that first step toward a dying animal in the jungle. This was witnessing the purest miracle that exists, a mother's unconditional love. The following weeks brought steady recovery. The tigress gained weight. Her wound healed cleanly. The cub grew strong and healthy, never wandering more than a few feet from his mother. The plan was to eventually release them back into a protected zone of the jungle, away from areas where poachers operated, where they could live their lives as they were meant to be lived. Wild, free, together. But before that happened, something occurred that no one had anticipated. Something that some would call coincidence and others would call fate. The man had returned to his normal routine. He occasionally visited the rehab center to check on the tigress and her cub's progress, but he knew he shouldn't get too involved. These were wild animals, and the less human contact they had, the better for their eventual reintegration into nature. But one day, while walking a trail near where it all began, he stopped. There was something in the air. A presence. That instinctive feeling all living beings get when they're being watched. He turned slowly, and there, about 60 feet away, was her. The tigress. Already released, with her cub playing between her paws, fully recovered and magnificent in her natural habitat. His first instinct was to back away, give her space, not interfere. But before he could move, the tigress took 2 steps toward him. She stopped, looked directly into his eyes, the same way she had that first day when she lay dying and desperate. And then she did something that defied all logic, everything we know about wild animals and their relationship with humans. She sat down, held his gaze for a long moment, a moment charged with recognition, with memory, with something no scientist could quantify, but both of them understood perfectly. It wasn't gratitude. That word is too human, too simple for what passed between them. It was acknowledgement. It was the shared knowledge that their lives had intersected at the most critical moment possible, and that both had chosen trust over fear, compassion over survival instinct. The cub, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, playfully pounced toward his mother, breaking her attention. She glanced down at her son, and then, without looking back, turned and disappeared into the trees with her little one following close behind. The man stood there for a long time after they were gone. Not with sadness, but with a sense of completeness that we rarely experience in life. Because he had been part of something larger than himself. He had witnessed the power of maternal love in its purest form. He had risked everything based solely on empathy and compassion, and had been rewarded not with measurable gratitude, but with the opportunity to save 2 lives that mattered as much as any on this planet. Leave a comment below and tell us, would you have done what this man did? Would you have taken that risk? Because I want to know if you believe in these moments of connection that transcend species, language, and logic. There are people who hear this story and question it. They say it's too extraordinary to be true, that wild animals don't act this way, that there must be some more logical explanation. But those who say that have never looked into the eyes of an animal in true desperation, have never witnessed that moment when the barriers between species dissolve and all that remains is the basic understanding that we're all living beings who want to survive, who want to protect those we love, who seek help when we no longer have the strength to go on alone. This story teaches us something fundamental about who we are as a species. It reminds us that compassion isn't weakness, that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is taking 1 step forward when everyone else is stepping back. That love, whether between humans or between a mother tiger and her cub, is the most powerful force that exists in this world. And it reminds us that we share this planet with extraordinary creatures who feel, who suffer, who love with an intensity that sometimes makes us seem small by comparison. Creatures who deserve our respect, our protection, our compassion. If this story touched your heart, if you felt even a fraction of the emotion that man felt in the jungle that day, share it. Because stories like this need to be told. They need to remind us that in a world that often seems increasingly divided and cold, there are still moments of pure connection, of selfless kindness, of love that transcends all barriers. And if you want to keep seeing stories that show you the most beautiful side of the relationship between humans and animals, subscribe to this channel. Turn on those notifications. Because every week we bring you real stories of rescues, of second chances, of moments that restore your faith in humanity and in the beauty of this world we all share. That man returned to his normal life after that final encounter in the jungle. But he was no longer the same. How could he be after holding the gaze of a dying predator and seeing in those eyes not threat, but hope? After witnessing the sacrifice a mother was willing to make for her child. After being part of something that most people will never experience in their entire lives. He walks through the world differently now. Looks at animals with more respect. Treats every living being with more consideration. Because once you've seen the depth of emotion and awareness that exists behind those wild eyes, you can't just forget it and carry on as before. And somewhere in the jungle, a tigress hunts with her cub growing strong by her side. Maybe sometimes she passes by that place where it all happened. Maybe she stops for a moment, remembering the strange human who risked everything when she needed it most. Or maybe not. Maybe for her it was simply another day of survival, another obstacle overcome in the relentless struggle to keep her child alive. But for us, those who hear this story, it means something more. It means that in this world there are people willing to risk everything for a life that isn't their own. It means that compassion exists even in the most dangerous circumstances. It means that love, in all its forms, is stronger than fear. This is what connects all of us, whether we walk on 2 legs or 4, whether we live in cities or jungles. The desire to protect, the need to be seen, the hope that when we're at our most vulnerable, someone will choose kindness over convenience. And that mother tiger, fighting infection and pain and exhaustion, choosing to trust a human because it was her baby's only chance. That wasn't just animal instinct. That was love in its most primal, most powerful, most undeniable form. Think about that the next time you see an animal. The next time you have the opportunity to show compassion to a creature that can't speak your language but can feel pain, fear, and hope just as deeply as you can. Because we're all in this together, sharing this beautiful, fragile planet. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get a moment like the one that man experienced. A moment that reminds us why we're here. A moment that shows us that beyond all our differences, all our divisions, all our fears, there's something fundamental that connects every living being, the capacity to care. That's the real miracle of this story. Not that a man approached a dangerous predator. Not that a tiger trusted a human. But that in a moment of crisis, 2 beings from completely different worlds found a way to see each other. Really see each other. And in that seeing, everything changed. So go ahead. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that compassion still exists in this world. And leave a comment telling us about a moment when you chose kindness over fear. Because those stories matter. Those moments matter. And together, we can create a world where more of them happen. The tigress and her cub are out there right now, living their lives in the wild where they belong. And somewhere, a man carries the memory of golden eyes that held his gaze and asked a question that had no words. Will you help me? And he answered with the only response that truly matters. Yes. Yes, I will. That's the choice we all face, every single day. When we see suffering, do we look away, or do we step forward? When we encounter the unfamiliar, do we react with fear, or do we choose understanding? When someone asks for help, whether with words or with a desperate glance, do we make excuses, or do we act? This man made his choice in a jungle clearing, with a dying tiger and a hidden cub depending on him. You'll make yours in your own way, in your own time, in circumstances that are uniquely yours. But when that moment comes, remember this story. Remember that courage sometimes looks like compassion. That trust can bridge the unbridgeable. That love, in the end, is always worth the risk.